So let's go ahead and get started with introductions. Latoya, could you hop on and just let everybody hear your voice and what you do?
Yes, thanks so much. I'm Latoya Toller. I'm a mental health therapist. My business is Mindful Counseling Professionals. I work with anxiety, grief, parenting, relationship issues, and I'm also a wellness-centered interior decorator, and my business there is Mindful Home Interiors.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Marianne Brenneman. I'm the owner of Mindful Health and Harmony, and I am a board certified teen and family coach. And I work with families to become more communicative with each other, more centered, more connected, more confident in their relationships.
Hi, my name's Anastasia Aruz, and I am a licensed counselor and a certified coach. And what I like to do is combine both the counseling and the coaching to help parents build emotionally healthy family systems. I specialize in helping parents navigate all kinds of family dynamics while protecting their own well-being and their child's safety.
I'm Irene Googe with Loving Lesson Sleep Solutions, and I help anxious, overwhelmed parents with preschoolers go from exhausted and confident. We pinpoint the root causes of sleep struggles, and we create a personalized plan with respectful sleep strategies.
We're excited to have you all here and to hear all of your wonderful insights on this topic. Thank you so much. Not every co-parenting situation is going to be in harmony. There is going to be hostility between some of these situations. That's where communication breakdowns, they're going to happen. They seem to sit at the center of so many co-parenting struggles, regardless of how the parents are getting along. When conflict shows up, how can caregivers tell the difference between a true disagreement and a power struggle that's really about unmet needs? I'm going to hop over to Latoya. You had emphasized assertive communication and emotional regulation. What are some practical ways parents can communicate clearly and set boundaries without escalating the conflict, especially when things are emotionally charged, things are tense? What do you do in those situations?
Yeah, well, I think the very first thing that I think about is making it okay to ask for help. I think, this process is, we're probably going to say it over and over again, really challenging. And I think, there's just so many emotions that culturally people assign to going through a divorce or separating, and just making it okay to say, you know what, I can't do this by myself. I need somebody to help me with the things that I didn't know I was going to face here. So this concept of assertive communication is really about expressing ourselves in a way that respects our needs, also is going to respect the needs of others, certainly caring for our children, and, navigating adjustments like divorce and co-parenting is going to just make things harder. So being able to recognize our limits as parents, talking with trusted supports, connecting with community resources that can help us plan for needed activities, taking breaks, getting rest. And while we're also managing those responsibilities of work, home life, parenting in general, it can be really challenging to recognize when we've kind of internalized everything and don't have a place to put it, or we can't say when. So, those are things that really need to be addressed. I think another thing that I think of is just encouraging regular communication with your child about their thoughts and feelings. Because again, I believe, Marianne, you mentioned this too. Again, they didn't ask for this to happen. There's a lot of emotions and things going on in their mind about why is my family, separating. But good or bad, allow them space to ask questions, listen to what it is that they are saying and respond to them using age-appropriate language. I think this can help to bring the temperature down, at least a little bit. And then talking about the issue in brief segments. I mean, sometimes there's just a lot of information, and just condensing it in a way that they can receive it and helping them to see you as a safe place to share their ideas, figure things out, reinforce the idea that you're going to make the best decision for them that you can. And this might cause challenges for us, right? Because we might be hearing a lot of things from our kids that are difficult to hear. And it might be really important for us to seek separate counsel about that separately. But being, with them, being physically present, being emotionally available is going to give them a lot more confidence about the process. I would say another thing that comes to mind is avoiding oversharing the challenges of separation or divorce with kids, even if they're teenagers. Because, we might assume that they know certain things already or they have the capacity to take it in. But I think this is really something that we need to protect our kids from to a large degree, giving them the opportunity to be kids, not feeling like they need to take care of us as the parents, creating solutions for adults in a way that they're not equipped to do. So, it might be important for us to look out for, do I need to connect with a therapist to work through, my emotions or other trusted supports like friends? I would also say kind of, being able to identify the specific problem and the thoughts, again, the feelings. It brings up modeling calm as best as possible. There could be a lot of things happening and swirling around, but modeling calm communication for our kids, and finding a proactive way to talk about the issues is, again, going to be another benefit for them. I think, those things make a big difference. Discussing the problem versus making the person the problem, certainly if we're going through a divorce, it's likely that, mom's mad at dad, mom's mad at mom, there's, but the kids don't necessarily need to be a part of that. We might want to just address, okay, there's this particular challenge versus making the person the problem. If there are situations where we're recognizing my child's having a really hard time, are there situations that are creating a bit more overstimulation, kind of removing them from those situations as best as possible? So it might be creating a more supportive environment, moving to a quieter room, quieter space, moving away from additional people who are not directly involved, getting down on their level, making eye contact with them so they know that you hear them and you understand. I think those can be important things. And I think a couple last things I'll say is just helping our kids to understand that we also have needs. It's really, it's natural that we're going to, again, be parents in this situation, but reminding them of the benefit of, balance. So taking breaks, having healthy routines, doing things that, we may be able to do 2 activities a week versus 4, because we have to arrange for, getting you back and forth. We need to have downtime as a family. So that maintaining consistency with routines and expectations so everybody has a sense of what to expect.
Thank you for that, LaToya. I think it was really powerful, in particular, what you said about making sure that the parents aren't in some way putting it on the child to manage the emotions and to take that role on as a child. And I think that's very common, unfortunately, in this scenario. So I think that's a really important piece to add in there. Irene, you've reframed power struggles as communication clues, and I absolutely love that perspective. Can you explain what parents should be listening for underneath of those struggles and how responding differently can shift the entire dynamic?
Yeah. So I think when we think about the power struggles, those are communication clues and not a conflict to win. Because oftentimes we feel like we have to win in a situation, and then we have to figure out, well, what is the other person doing? And we can get into our heads and get stuck. And so I think what LaToya was talking about, like giving ourselves permission to pause and take care of ourselves, is really important. And then one of the frameworks that I share with my families is called Breathe Love. And breathe love means I'm going to really pause, and then I'm going to listen, I'm going to observe, I'm going to validate and empower the situation. So we're listening, observing, validating, empowering what's actually happening. Why is there this power struggle? And this does take a little bit of self-awareness for a parent to take a pause and reflect, because oftentimes when we look at the routines and the rhythms, there's usually something that's a misunderstanding. And maybe there's not a clear beginning, middle, or end of a routine. And so sometimes rather than trying to pin it on the other parent or what is happening in the other house or anything like that, it's just looking at like this present moment and understanding there is just a communication misunderstanding here. And so what do I need to know to show up and create a trusting relationship with my child, a trust relationship with the children, whomever is in front of me, and recognizing how do we communicate so we're kind and firm and clear through that process, because that's going to really help us be able to like move forward and problem solve instead of just throwing blame and falling into like fear or judgment into like what is actually happening in that moment. And when we can like pause and breathe love, that's going to help us come from a place of love and learning. We're getting more curious. And so that helps us show up and be more compassionate in the process.
I just want to very briefly, I loved so much of what you said, and I just want to highlight for everyone listening. It's a communication clue, not a conflict to win. What a powerful shift in thought process there. And then the process was pause, listen, observe, validate, and empower. And all of that shifts in our brain, I think is really, really powerful. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you, Irene.
You're welcome.
We had mentioned this earlier, how I think it was Marianne actually that had said these parents are hurt and they don't mean to pull the children in, but sometimes it happens. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. And I would love to hear more about that, Marianne, and any of the other experts if you want to jump in. But how can parents effectively communicate about each other in ways that protect the kids emotionally, especially when they don't see eye to eye or are still carrying frustration from the relationship into everything?
Yeah, and that's such a tricky one because it's an emotionally charged situation in most cases. I mean,
Yes.
they're not together because something went wrong.
Right.
Somebody did something. I mean, it's very rare, I think, that couples are just like, you know what, this isn't working. Let's go our separate ways. It doesn't really go down that way. So, it's hard to be a good parent when you're emotionally dysregulated, I think. And so I loved what LaToya said about they have to make sure they get themselves help. They have to see a therapist, a counselor, something else that helps them, get their own emotion in a good state. I think an excellent rule of thumb, which is way easier said than done, is to just not talk badly about the other parent. That's, so often it's just the backhanded comments like, well, if your dad hadn't done X, Y, and Z, and then they draw the kids in, we can't do that. We have to bite our tongues. We have to remember again that the kids' feelings come first all the time. It's easy to criticize and we shouldn't be doing that. So your kid comes home from visitation and starts to do something that you don't allow in your house. And the kid says, well, mom lets me do it at that house or dad lets me do it at their house. It would take every fiber of your being to not fly off the handle and say something like, well, they let you do this because they're this, this, and this. And it's hard not to do that. So I like that pause moment, that breathe, that, listen and validate. And this played very nicely into what Irene was saying. When a parent hears that, they can say, well, I know it must be very hard for you to have to go between two residential houses. I understand that. And I'm sorry that it ended up that way. I know that your dad has a few different rules than I do, or we don't see eye to eye on some of these rules. But at my house, we do it this way. And here's why. Period. The end. Just you let them know that you're sorry, let them know you understand, let them know it might be confusing, but I think it's important to also set that boundary. And you can say your dad and I don't see eye to eye on this, or your mom and I don't see eye to eye on this, whatever it is. But this is confusing, but at this house we do it this way because I think that's what's best for all of us. And so I think that's a really powerful statement of, setting your boundary, but still hearing them and not lashing out at the other parent. One thing that I think is important is if parents cannot be civil to each other, then they have to limit their communication. And you can't yell at each other you can't really yell at each other if you're texting or emailing. I'm sure you can be yelling at your device as you're texting, but if it's really hard for you to be civil and not do things poorly in front of your children, that then texting is a great way. Leave it to details. Susie's soccer game is at this time at this place, and she needs you to bring this equipment, and I will pick her up afterwards, or whatever. Unless it's an emergency, obviously. But I think that's what you're going to have to do if you can't actually be civil. There's a terrific book I wanted to mention, and there's an accompanying website called Our Happy Divorce. So it's ourhappydivorce.com. And it was a couple that they were not doing it well. Admittedly, they were not doing it well. They were arguing, they were yelling at each other, they were doing all the bad things. And then one day, can't remember if they had a mediator or not. Either way, they either had a mediator or they decided to just mediate themselves, right? They decided that they just could no longer do this to their children, and that they were going to do everything they could do going forward to always put those kids first. It has just come together beautifully. They've both since remarried. They've added additional children. And I know that's not a usual scenario, but I know that this book provides some really good suggestions on how you can at least move forward in a better light, putting your children first.
Marianne, I love what you said about not speaking poorly about the other parent. I was raised by a single mom, and while I'm not a child of a divorce, because my parents were never married, and I didn't really know my dad until much later in life, but my mom, to her credit, never spoke poorly about my father. However, she did work in, she would randomly say, just at the most random moments, the one thing you get from your father is your stinky feet. And for the record, I do not have stinky feet. I just want to put it for the record. But it was just, I think, my mom's one way of kind of saying something maybe. But she never spoke poorly about him. And I do have a friendship with him now. I do have a relationship with him as an adult because I didn't grow up hearing negative things about him. And that was really important. So I think that's an important thing to note.
I have a very close friend who, whenever she needed or wanted to say something bad about her ex-husband, would call me. And that was fine. Like, say whatever you want to me. And she said, do you think the kids will ever understand how he is versus how I am? And I said, maybe. and maybe not. It's not about winning. But eventually I think kids do grow up and they just realize who their parents are, but for better and for worse. We grow up and we realize people do their thing, and
we're all human, and we're all just doing our best.
We're all just doing our best. And sometimes you might think, okay, you could do a little better than that, but really maybe they can't. Yeah.
Anastasia, I would love to hear from you. Please add some insights here. I know you have so much experience working with moms and families. What do you see when it comes to communication and power struggles and resolving conflict in these scenarios?
I think it's really important to listen to the kids, right? I always think of it child first. Listen to the kids, listen to what they're feeling, what they're thinking, letting them be open with you as much as possible. It's interesting when you guys were talking about parents not talking bad. I do come from a divorced family. I married into a family that was divorced and had I have two stepchildren. And over the years, we've had a lot of conflict, both in my childhood and now. And so I feel like this has been my life in a sense, which is really interesting. I think the biggest thing when I think about this whole topic is consistency and predictability for kids, like really being consistent with them and being predictable about all things, whether it's like where they're staying, where they're going, because kids need that, and being honest with them. Kids can feel the energy. Here's an example. My dad was an alcoholic, right? And so my mom would not let us get in the car with him if he'd been drinking, but he would pick us up on Wednesdays to go to his house because his wife, they had a baby. And we wanted to go because we wanted to be with our little brother. And instead of like lying to us of like, your dad cannot pick you up because of whatever, she was really honest. Like, he's drank too much. He cannot pick you up, but I'm going to call your stepmom and she can pick you up, whatever it is. But they were very honest about it. They didn't hide it. They didn't act like there wasn't a problem. They were very clear on that there was an issue. and it's happening, and this is how we're going to deal with it. So I think just being very open with children, being honest with them, they can feel the energy, they can feel what's happening in the room, and here again, what's developmentally appropriate. I mean, you're not going to tell a 3 or 4-year-old this, but as they get older, you can be pretty honest about various topics that are happening in this situation.
I love that you bring both professional and lived experience to this conversation, Anastasia. I think that's a really great perspective to have. So thank you very much for the time that you've spent with us today and the information and the knowledge that you've shared with our community. It's been wonderful to spend this time with you. Thank you so much.